A professional artist and instructor for more than 20 years, Lee Hammond has authored 20 Northlight books so far, including How to Draw Lifelike Portraits from Photographs, Lifelike Drawing with Lee Hammond, and Paint Realistic Animals in Acrylic with Lee Hammond. She owned and operated the Midwest School of Art in Lenexa, Kansas for 5 years, and now has a studio in Overland Park, Kansas, where she teaches. She conducts drawing and painting seminars, gives school lectures, and mentors nationwide. A certified police composite artist on call for the Kansas City metro area, she has also worked with America's Most Wanted, been a contributing writer for the Artist magazine, and is licensed with many NASCAR racing teams to produce art, with prints sold on www.nascar.com and in racing magazines. In this workshop, you'll learn how to draw a realistic portrait, step by step.
Hi, I'm Lee Hammond, and if you want to draw, you came to the right place. Anybody can draw beautiful portraits with my proven methods and the Hammond blended pencil technique. Okay, the most important thing about this particular technique is the tools that you use. Now, I started this method way back in the 80s, and that's a long time ago. And back then, art was a lot more impressionistic, if you will, more of a free-spirited self-expression type. And my methods actually weren't very well received. They actually said that my methods looked too stiff and too overblended and looked more like medical illustration instead of really like a fine art. And of course I didn't disagree with them, and so I kept on working on it. And I started with a mechanical pencil, which was almost unheard of because back then mechanical pencils were really used for just drafting and bookkeeping and things like that. And I worked for an art supply store, and the salesman for Pentel came in and showed me how to use a mechanical pencil, and I've been using it ever since. And it's because of this that I get such a fine blend. Mechanical pencils come in a lot of different shapes and styles. Don't let that bother you too much because like this one that I'm using, it's kind of like the Cadillac, it's the top of the line. But you can buy inexpensive ones in different shapes, and they really are just holders for the lead that you're going to use, the lead being 2B. Now, most pencils come with HB, so I found that to be a little bit hard, and that's what I started this method with when I was coming up with it. And it was okay, but I found it didn't blend really well because HB is kind of a hard lead. So I switched to 2B after I found out that it actually existed. And the 2B lead gives you a lot of tonal variation where you can draw very lightly with it, but you can push hard and get really dark. And then because it's kind of powdery, your blend is really, really good with it. So always look for 2B. So just remember 2B or not 2B, and then you'll know what lead to get. The pencils, like I said, come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, and it's really what's comfortable in your hand. I have a tendency to kind of go with the fatter ones. I think it's just easier on your hands, especially if you're getting arthritis like me. But some of them are small and dainty, some of them have the little grips, but like I said, these guys are just nothing but holders for the actual lead. So do what's comfortable for you. And you don't have to spend a lot of money on them because they range from like $2 up to 20. So, you know, do whatever's good for you. To get the blend, we're going to use these things, and these are called tortillas. My kids' classes used to call them those taco things because it reminds them of tortilla. But what these are basically just pieces of paper wound up into a cone, and you use them to blend, and I'm going to demonstrate them in a minute, so don't worry. This is one that's kind of fallen apart, and this is one that will be thrown away, but this is basically what they are. They're just little pieces of paper that have been coiled up. If yours ever start looking like this, throw it away. That is what gives you the blend. Now also there are stumps, and in my book you won't see me refer to these because way back when I didn't like the way these were formulated. They were more like hard paper, and the blend wasn't really good, and they were used more for like pastel and charcoal drawing, so I guess they didn't have to be that soft. But now they've kind of reformulated. I don't know if they're just using different paper or what, but I like these a lot now. So any future books that I do, I'm going to refer to these as well. Okay? You're also going to have a bunch of erasers, and each eraser has a different application, if you will. Now, a kneadable eraser is really just kind of like a piece of clay. It's good because you can stretch it, you can use a small little piece, you can form it into points. This is also good for what I call drawing in light, which isn't erasing at all, it's adding light back into your drawing. And I'll demonstrate that later too. But this is how you get shine in hair and highlights in eyes and things like that. You need a good catch-all eraser. Something like this. This is called a union, where it's like for a pencil eraser on one side and ink on the other. The ink side's good if you get some stubborn stuff in there that won't come off your page. You have to be careful though, because they're pretty abrasive and you can damage your work. There's also these. Now these are driving me crazy because you used to find these everywhere, and they're typewriter erasers. And I just used them religiously my whole career, and then all of a sudden they quit making them. And I guess that's because of computers and what have you, and all of a sudden they went off the market. And please quit emailing me, I can't get them. But now a company has come out with this, and now it's a fine art tool. So you'll probably pay a lot more money for it because it's been relabeled art, but they're becoming available again. So be patient, look for them. Hopefully they'll get popular again. There's one that's similar, and this is like the stick eraser, and you uncoil it as you go. But this one is a vinyl, and the typewriter eraser is more of that abrasive type. So they can do similar things, but they're not the same. So it's not a substitute, it's just something to use in addition to. Okay? And then there's the good old pink pearl, which is just your basic, general, whatever eraser. As you're working, I can't tell you how important it is to use a drafting brush. As you're working, you never want to be going like this and rubbing your paper if you've got debris, because you're just going to smear it, and it's going to be hard to fix. Also, please don't blow on your paper. It is so common for us to be working and then just go poof. And I'm telling you, you're spitting on your paper. I don't care how delicate you are. Don't ever blow on your paper. Always use a drafting brush to brush away little things. It's delicate, it won't smear. Everybody should have one of these in their arsenal of supplies. When you're doing portraits, it's very important, especially with a portrait like we're doing today, where the eyes are looking straight at you. The irises and the pupils are circles. And nothing looks worse in a portrait than having eyes with two different sized irises, or they're oblong or whatever. It looks terrible. So a template will save the day. So have a template. There's an ellipse template also if you're drawing eyes from the side or what have you, but that's what you're going to need. Now, the paper. Paper is very, very important for this technique because different papers have different textures. And if you're drawing on a paper that has a lot of tooth or a lot of texture to it, that's going to show in your work, and that's going to interrupt that blend. So what you want to buy is a very smooth 2-ply Bristol paper. It comes in two surfaces, one's plate and one's vellum or regular. You always want the smoothest available for this particular technique. So go with 2-ply smooth Bristol, you'll get great results. To learn this technique, the first thing you have to do is learn how to use your tools. So you want to take your mechanical pencil and make sure you've got that 2B lead in there, and you're going to learn how to blend. Now, I start all my students this way, learning how to go dark to the white of the paper seamlessly. You don't want to see the choppiness, you don't want to see scribble lines, and it looks a lot easier than it really is. This is what most people come up with at first, and no amount of blending is going to blend that mess out and make it look smooth. And smoothness is the key to this technique. So let me demonstrate it for you, because I never tell anybody to do something that I don't show them how to do it first. So we're going to take just your piece of paper, and the first thing is how to hold your pencil. All right? Now, when you're pushing really hard and you want to get this real dark tone, the last thing you want to do is hold your pencil at the side, because you're just going to snap that lead. So to put a lot of pressure on it, you're going to have to hold it kind of perpendicular. And that was a piece of lead breaking in my pencil that fell out, and that's going to happen to you too, so don't freak out. So anyway, you're going to hold it straight up and down, perpendicular, and you're going to push. And you're going to go up and down firmly, and then back and forth at the same time. Now you can see how I'm getting a little bit of the pencil line thing, but just keep going back and forth. And it's that back and forth and up and down process that's going to make that fill in. See how you can't really see the pencil lines anymore? And that is key to this technique. Now, you're going to want to lighten your touch, and you're going to come over to the side here, move over to the right, and you're going to slowly lighten these tones. So we're going dark to light. And it takes practice. If you've not used a mechanical pencil before, it's not going to feel normal. So just give yourself some time, be nice to yourself, and give yourself the proper practice, because practice is everything. Now, as I get lighter, you see I've probably pulled back on the pencil a little bit. That's so I can't put as much pressure on it. And when I'm going lightly, I can put the pencil kind of on its side and relax a little bit. And you really do want to relax, because if you try to over control your pencil lines, they end up looking stiff like that. So you just kind of let it flow. Just lighten up a little bit and just let it go back and forth lightly. And just keep going until you lighten up going into the white of the paper. If you see little areas like that, just kind of go fill them in. And just keep going back and forth and up and down until it fades. Okay, now take your time when you're doing this. I know this isn't real interesting, and this part of the process it seems a little elementary, but really part of your practice is going to learn patience, because you have to take your time to make it look good. So when you finally kind of get out to this direction here where it's fading to the white of the paper, just kind of go back, make sure you like what you see, and then stop. And that's where these tortillons are going to come into play. Okay? Now, these you're going to hold at an angle. You don't want to use the tip, because if you use the tip, they are spiral wound, and they're going to end up like this if you use the tip too much, and they're going to flatten out. And I can always tell when one of my students has been pushing too hard and using the tip, because I go over and they've got a whole bunch of these that look like this. Now, it's not ruined if it's like this, and I'm going to give you a little trick right here. Just take a paper clip and kind of straighten it out a little bit, and this is going to become your tortillon rescue kit. Every house should have one. But when they get blunt, you can just take this and repair your tortillon. The only time you want to throw these away is if they unravel, like the one that I pitched, or if the tip is like bending over and everything and you can't use it anymore. Okay? So you're going to take a tortillon, preferably a clean one at this juncture, and you're going to hold it at an angle. If you hold it too flat, these little ridges are going to leave marks in your paper, and if you hold it too blunt, it's going to get blunt. So we're just going to start right where we began, and that's in the dark, and we're going to use the same process. We're going to go up and down and back and forth, and this tortillon is going to take that graphite and smooth it out and make it real polished looking. And it also helps fill in and get rid of your pencil lines, and you're just going to go very slow, just like what I'm doing right here. Now, I used to think if I pushed really hard, I was going to get a better blend. And I used to just overblend everything, thinking, you know, the harder I pushed, the more that graphite was going to behave. And I was so wrong. Actually, all I was doing, and of course it took me years to figure this out, so, you know, learn from me, do what I say, not what I do. Use a very light touch, because that keeps the graphite on the outside surface of the paper, because if you use a lot of pressure like I used to, you're embedding it and you're roughing up the paper, and that graphite's not going to go anywhere. And I could not figure out why I had little blotches. Why couldn't I get it smooth? And it's because the harder I pressed, the more I was rubbing it into the paper. It took me a long time to figure that out. So learn at the beginning to go very lightly. Now, you can see I'm at the end over here, and things are looking pretty good, pretty smooth. I can see sometimes these little light spots, I call them hot spots. Once in a while I can just kind of go back and fill it in, but see, oops, I got too dark. I'm going to show you how to fix that too. But when you come over here, you're going to lighten your touch as much as you possibly can. You're actually going past where you put the graphite and the pencil lines. Now the tortillon has picked up some of that graphite and it's drawing for you. So that's why you can get that gradual fade from black to white, and you can't even tell where it ends. Now, I'm going to show you how to run some damage control. What if you get a little dark spot like that and it just doesn't fit to where it's supposed to be? Take your kneadable eraser and you're going to just take a small piece, and don't use a big piece like this because you just can't work with it. Just take a small piece, roll it in your fingers, and give yourself a little point, just kind of like a pencil. Now I call this drawing in reverse because if you use the term eraser, it kind of implies that you've made this mistake and you have to erase it and you're starting over. But think of this as just drawing in reverse, where you're just going to take that little dark spot and you're just going to very carefully lift it out of there. Just going to camouflage it so you can't see it anymore. And there you go. Drawing in reverse, not erasing. The next step, once you learn that blend, and it's very important that you do quite a few of these. I start my students out with this and I make them do, 10, 15 of them until they get that blend, okay? So practice that before you go any further, because it's really important not to jump ahead until you're ready. The next step is the sphere. Now, some people think I put a little bit too much emphasis on the sphere, and I couldn't disagree more. I found that if you can draw a realistic sphere, very smooth, good light source, you can basically draw anything. So I torture my students with the sphere over and over and over again, and I make them draw them from left-sided light sources on the right, up above, from below, anything to embed this in their memory, because if you can draw this, like I said, you can draw anything. Now the sphere correlates with the 5 elements of shading. The 5 elements of shading will represent a place on this sphere. Let's start with the dark, because when I draw, I always draw the darks first, and I let the darks create my lights, and I'll explain that in a minute. The darkest area on a sphere is opposite the light source, because it's a shadow, but it's also not even on the sphere. It's actually underneath, and this is what's called a cast shadow. It's the shadow the object is casting on the surface in which it's sitting. So, looking at these, and this is another example of a sphere over here with a background, all of these spheres have different light sources. This one's kind of coming from the top. This one's actually coming from out here on the right. And so is this one, but it's a little bit further on the right, and the background makes it look different, totally different. Okay? The cast shadow is your darkest dark. It would be representative of number 1 on the box. Get that as dark as you can, and I'm going to demonstrate this for you so there's not going to be any mystery to it. The next grade of tone would be the shadow edge. And this is on the sphere, and it's right here. Can you see where I'm pointing? It doesn't go clear to the edge of the object. It's the edge of the shadow, not the edge of the object. You can see it very well on this one. You see how it's darker right there? That's what makes it look like it's curving. You can see it on this one as well. Okay, so that's the second grade of tone. The third one is right in the middle, and appropriately called the half tone. Now, if this was like a blue ball, the half tone would be the true color of the ball, not affected by a highlight from the light source or a shadow. It's right in the middle. So it's right in here. Okay? Now we're going to this one. And this is the one that's a little tricky. This would be the reflected light, or where the halftone is fading into the bright white. But look at this little light edge down here. Can you see that? That is what really makes something have dimension and form. It's so important. And on beginners or amateurs, this is the first thing that gets left out, and that's why their drawings look flat. The reflected light is what separates these two shadows. It separates the cast shadow from the shadow edge and gives you that little ring of roundness right there. It's never bright white, and I see some of my students, they'll get it in there and they'll leave it too light, and then it looks unrealistic and it starts looking like a white ring around a disc or something instead of making it look dimensional. So make sure that that's more like this and not white, okay? The last tone is white of the paper, and it's the full light area, and that's where the light is hitting the object full strength. But it's very, very important that the blend is so gradual that you don't see like a hole in the paper, and that's hard to do. You have to make your blending look like it's seamless, and it fades into the white without you even knowing it. The best reflective light and the best light is light you don't really even notice. Okay, now to do this, there's some steps to it. And I'm going to talk you through it, and then I'm actually going to demonstrate it for you and take all the mystery out. Like we said before, you're going to start with your darkest darks. So you can see on this example that I've gone underneath, and this light source is coming right here. So all your shadows are going to be opposite, okay? Under here, I'm going to make sure that I don't lose that edge. You don't want to lose the roundness and have it start looking flat. So I put the cast shadow underneath first, and then I move up and I allow that little space and I put the shadow edge in. And I'm going with the contour. Another very important point. When you're blending, you always want to go with the form, not against it. And run that parallel. So that is very, very consistent as it goes around. Then you start your blending, and the more you blend, the more realistic it appears. So let's do one together, and I'll show you how it's done. No, I'm not so good that I can draw a perfect circle. So if you need to trace around something, do it. I do. I take the easy way out every time. So I think I just grabbed a roll of tape or a glass and created a circle. So do whatever you have to do. Now, remember, the light's coming this direction. So all of our shadows are going to be over here. So you don't want to start bringing your shadows up into this area, because then you lose your light source. Now I'm going to start with that cast shadow, and I'm going to come under here, and that will be the darkest dark. Now when you're doing curves, it's all about comfort. So if it helps, move your paper around. What you're drawing doesn't always have to be exactly the way you're going to view it later on. You can move your paper around and draw it upside down or sideways. It's whatever is comfortable for you. Also, I recommend always drawing on a tilted surface like this, because I see people that draw flat, and that's how we're used to doing it. That's how we were taught in school. No big deal. But it is a big deal, because when you're dealing with accurate shapes, if you draw flat, it looks good as long as you're looking at it flat. As soon as you pick that up and tilt it, you'll find that you've elongated. And I've seen heads that look great that way, and all of a sudden they've got like a forehead like this long. Your paper should always be pretty much like parallel your face, so you're looking at it at an angle, and that will prevent distortion. See how I'm holding that pencil perpendicular so I can get really dark under here? And I'm going with the curve. And the shadow gets lighter as it gets like further away from the sphere. So I'm going to use my little value scale exercise that we did before. And I'm going to start getting lighter and lighter as it comes out. It's at a curve this time, so that takes a little practice, So again, be nice to yourself and give yourself the proper amount of time to practice it. And just let that fade out, okay? Now you've got to start. I'm going to take the tortillon and I'm going to do exactly what I did for the value scale, and I'm going to lightly come out with it. Now if you get any little imperfections, just fill them in. Nothing's going to be perfect the first time, and I think what makes it frustrating for those of you that have my book is that it looks like it's 1, 2, 3 and it's done. And what you don't see and what you can't show in a book is the little, fix-its that go on in between each step. And sometimes you have to redo something or add to it or lighten something up. And it just takes time. And there is no 1, 2, 3 on it. It's a process, and you just have to learn to go with the process. And some people have longer processes than others. And there's no contest to be won here. I mean, if you're one of those that can do it quickly, good for you. If you're not, good for you. It's all about doing it well and not how quickly you can do it. Okay, so there's the beginning of the cast shadow. Now, we're going to move up and we're going to do the second tone, and that's going to be the shadow edge. And again, light from here, so it's going to be opposite, and it's going to go over here. I'm going to move my paper to make it easier. Get that curve. And see how I'm running parallel to the edge, and I'm leaving that little area for the reflected light. If you get it too dark down there, it's hard to back it out and make it look smooth, so just kind of leave it. But really make sure that you're still following the curve, because I've seen the shadow edge be drawn, kind of straight and not as curved, and it doesn't work. Lighten my touch, and it is harder when it is a curve to lighten as you go. And we don't have to get too carried away on the tones today, because how dark it is all about the light source, and we can just say that today we have a brighter light. Not quite so contrasty. You see how that's already starting to look around? Been doing this for 30 years and I never tire of that. It's still exciting every time I see the form created where it looks 3D. Okay, I'm about to make another very important point, and that is when drawing this outline, you never want an outline, you want an edge. And anything that looks like it's got a hard line drawn around it is going to look kind of cartoonish and take away the realism and make it look flat. So I'm going to take my eraser and I'm going to draw in reverse, and I'm going to lighten that line that I traced so it's barely there, especially in the full light area. And I'm taking the tortillon and I'm blending right to where that line was, and I'm letting the shading stop. And what that does is it creates the look of an edge instead of an outline. And now I'm just going to fade, and I'm going to create the half tone, and I'm going to fade up to to where the full light area is. And try to fade that so I can't see where it ends. Now, when you get into this stage, don't worry if you have to go back and redo or add more darkness here. For instance, you could deepen your shadow edge and bring it up a little higher. Like I said, there's no 1, 2, 3. It's a process. Do whatever you have to do and take as long as you have to. I am going to finish this sphere by just continuing with the blending and bringing it up towards the light and being careful not to get too much going up there. If your tortillion's getting dirty and you're dragging too much graphite, you want to change to a clean one. I always tell everyone they've got to have a good pile of clean ones to always go into the light source, because if you take a dirty one, you're just going to get it dark and darker, 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 and you're not going to be able to get a continual blend. You don't want to throw the tortillions away when they do get dirty, though, because you want to save those as long as their tip is good, because you're always going to need them for the dark areas. So you're going to collect the, I have thousands of them. I have drawers and drawers, but they're good. You can't throw them away. But you always have to have clean ones, so it's a little bit of a situation. But now you can see how with the blending that everything just comes up and gradually creates edges, not outlines, and fades to the white, and you have the look of a ball sitting on a table. And you are probably wondering, why do I have to draw a ball on a table if I want to draw portraits? And why does the sphere lend itself to portrait drawing? Well, I have the answer for that, and that is because your face is made up of spheres, especially mine, very round. Now, I have a picture of my granddaughter that we're going to be using as the step-by-step. And if you look at her face, you can see the roundness, which is a sphere. You can see the roundness of her nose, which is also a sphere. The roundness of her chin, another sphere. The cheeks, those are spheres too. Even the shape of the forehead. The 5 elements of shading create a face. Now, when I do a portrait, I generally will start drawing the eyes. But today, because we're talking about blending, I'm going to show you how to draw the nose, because it most closely resembles a sphere. If you look at some of the finished portraits that I have here, you can really see it. See how on this nose, all 5 elements of shading? Look at the roundness, the tip of the nose. You see the cast shadow underneath, just like the cast shadow underneath here? You can see the shadow edge and the reflected light. That's what makes it look round. You can see the half tone and how it fades up into the full light area where the light's hitting at full strength. So it's very, very, very important. You can also see it replicated here and here. Now, naturally, it's not going to be a perfect circle, and it's going to be changed because of the contours of the face, but you can clearly see how the sphere pertains to portrait drawing and why it's so important to not stop until you can do this well. If you're having problems, if you're still choppy, if things don't look dimensional, don't move on. Discipline yourself and learn how to do this very, very well first. Once you have your photograph selected, make sure that you've got a picture that's big enough. You can see on just the snapshot that her face is rather large in the frame, and that's real important. It's just too hard to draw from like a candid snapshot when someone's far away. If you can enlarge it without losing the detail, go for it. But if it's too small, I don't care how good the photo is and how badly you want to do it. You're not going to do yourself any favors by trying to work from a small photograph. So get a good one that you can really see your definitions. This is the original photo that I was working from. It's my granddaughter, she's so cute. I had a color copy enlargement made of it because the larger something is, the more you can see the details. And then I also had a black and white made of it because sometimes it's hard to look at someone like this, especially when their skin's very pale. it's hard to see the contours and the shading and know how to put it on the paper in graphite since it's black and white. So by having a black and white done, you can really see the shadows better and you can see the contours a little bit better, and it makes it easier for you to kind of go from color to black and white. Some people have a harder time with that than others. So if you're one of those that just doesn't see color as black and white, get the black and white copy. When you're having the copies done, don't do a Xerox copy, just like on a regular copy machine, because it doesn't recognize grades of tone. It just sees black and white, so it'll look real grainy and choppy. So have it done on a laser printer or a color copier on black and white setting, and it'll give you a smoother look. Or just, go on your computer if you're good with computers and just have it printed out in black and white. Getting it to the paper, there's a number of ways of doing it. And I find that with beginners or people that I haven't taught before, the easiest method is the grid method. And that's where everything's broken down into little boxes. So on the enlargement, I went ahead and I just, with a Sharpie marker, just drew 1-inch squares on my photograph, so I could then draw 1-inch squares on my drawing paper and draw what I see one box at a time. This is kind of a slow process, but it's good. It's a real good way of training your eye to see shapes, and it'll help your freehand skills immensely if you do this. By just going one box at a time and drawing what you see in each little box, you can get a lot of accuracy and save a lot of time from freehanding and then making corrections and things like that. There's other ways of getting things on a paper too. And oftentimes I'll have my students just put it in a projector and get the outline that way. There's a little controversy on the projector, but I use it and I'll stand by it, and I think it's a great way of saving time. What people don't understand is with a projector, if you don't know how to draw, the drawing that you get from the projector and the outline is not going to be any good anyway. So you still have to kind of know what you're doing. When you do the grid, you're kind of stuck with the size you do it. Now, if I wanted her a little bit bigger, I could make these squares like 1.5 inches, and it would enlarge it just that much, and that would be great. So this is what it looks like after you've drawn with the grid method, going one box at a time. It's a simple line drawing. You don't want a lot of detail because you're going to erase these boxes. And you draw the boxes lightly, and then when you're done and you're sure of your accuracy, you just come in with your kneaded eraser and lightly remove these little boxes without removing everything you just drew. And then we'll go from there. Now this is one that I enlarged a little bit so you could see it better, and it's without the grid. And basically just a standard accurate line drawing, and that's the foundation for your work. Now, like I said, normally what I do is when I'm drawing a portrait from the beginning, I'll start with the eyes, because I think the eyes have the essence of the soul, and if you don't capture that personality, then there's no point in going any further. But when I'm teaching students for the first time and I'm teaching them the blending, I go to the nose, and the nose looks like a sphere, so it's the perfect transition in your blending. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to draw this nose for you and show you what I mean. So I'm going to put this little snapshot aside, and I'm going to get the black and white out so I can look at it as well. So I can look at the color and I can look at the black and white at the same time. Now, just like when we drew the sphere, we're going to draw the darkest parts first, and that would be, in this particular case, under the nose in this little nostril area here. Now, her lighting is not that extreme. You don't have a lot of high contrast and a light side and a dark side and all that. So even though the cast shadow is dark, it's not going to be as dark as what we just did on the sphere. So try to always study what it is you're drawing and look at it and draw what you see, not what you know, because your brain is your worst enemy. We have a tendency to draw too much from memory or too much from what we've practiced before, And all the information you need for doing portraits is in your photograph. You don't have to make it up. It's all there. You just have to learn to see it properly, analyze it properly, and then replicate it properly. So here we go. I'm going to come under here and get that little cast shadow under her nose. And I'm going to be very careful not to get too dark with it. And now I'm going to move up and I'm going to get the shadow edge, which is right here on her nose, and you might be able to see it better on the black and white, although the grid's blocking it a bit. And there's that contour, and I'm leaving that little area of reflected light. And there's a little cast shadow on the side too. So we've got to quit thinking sphere now, and we've got to think nose and all the different shapes and contours that make up a nose. And as I said, go slow. You don't want to rush through this. You want to be accurate. And you actually want it to look like the person that you're drawing. That could be a problem. Don't forget this area. The area between the nose and the mouth is often left undone. And it's one of the most important parts because it connects the two. But students will do a beautiful rendition of the nose, and then they'll move and they'll do a beautiful rendition of the mouth, and then they'll forget to connect the two. And then they look like they're free floating. So you always want to remember everything runs together. It's just one big puzzle, and one thing leads to another. And I think that's why the grid is so good, because it teaches you to see things as a puzzle, little shapes that are all connecting. If you can learn to do that, then you can be much more accurate with your work. Okay? Now, I've got it blocked in. Now I'm going to take the tortillon and I'm going to very softly blend out her nose, and I'm going to move to a clean one. And she's so pale, I don't want to get her too dark too fast. So I'm just going to very carefully blend this out. And you can see the form being created as we go. When you're working with skin tones, this is one of the most common things that's asked me is, how do you know if it's too dark or it's too light? Well, here's something to remember. When you're blending, see this little highlight on the tip of her nose here? The only way that white can show up on your paper is if there's something dark next to it. So if you've left it so light at this stage of the game that you can't see the highlight on her nose, then you probably still have it too light. There's rarely any white of the paper really left. So don't be afraid to use light shading just about everywhere, because the little highlights and things can be lifted out, and they're only going to show if there's enough gray tone around it for it to show up. And don't forget areas like this, outside the face. That's where the nose is connecting to the face. It's not cut out and just pasted on there. It's all one continual form. So you want to make sure that everything runs together like a puzzle. Some have more hard-edged definitions to them, but they're still all connected. By coming out into the face like that, everything looks like it fits and it belongs. And don't forget this little area down here, and we'll work on it more when we get to the mouth. And then we're going to come up here and connect it to the eyes, and then we'll do more with that when we do the eyes. And there you have a nose. Now that we've finished the nose, we're going to move on up to the eye. or both eyes, and we are going to tie the nose and the eyes together. Now, if you remember, I said everything is like a puzzle, and it's important to look before you start the rendering phase to make sure that you've got an accurate line drawing and that everything's lining up. Now, one thing about a face that's like straightforward like this with no turns or whatever, everything is symmetrical, and there are some guidelines. For instance, the eye, if you would draw a line from the corner of the eye down, you're going to get the side of the nose. So, and if you look between both eyes from here to here, there's one eye width. So those are the kind of things to look for to make sure everything's lining up correctly before you start the blending phase, because it's a lot easier to change things in the line drawing phase than it is the blending phase. Trust me on that one. So we're going to go up here, and I've pretty much drawn the eyes in according to my grid. And we're going to start by getting the iris and the pupil accurate. Now, first you want to draw it in by freehand and by looking at everything like a puzzle. And that means not looking at this just as an eye, but looking at it as what shapes make up an eye. So you're going to look at the shape on either side of the iris and see what shapes they're making. This is a shape, this is a shape. Even the lower lid thickness is a shape, and that's hugely important, is that lower lid thickness. If you don't have that, things are going to look flat, and most people will just draw a line under the eye, and it looks really flat and unrealistic, and they can't understand why their eyes don't have that certain essence. So, especially with her looking kind of up at us, you really see that little ledge. So I make sure that I've got that drawn in. And then I look for the placement of the iris in the eye and freehand it to the best of my ability. Now, keep in mind, I've been doing this for 30 years, so I can draw a pretty decent circle. But to really make it look better, you can take this template, and the template will crisp up your edges. And that's all you're doing. Don't leave that empty and then try to put the template here and try to draw it with it. It won't work. All you're doing is taking and trying to find the hole that best matches what you freehanded, and it's just going to clean up your edges for you and just give you a better, cleaner looking circle. And really important, use the same hole for both eyes since they are symmetrical. I've seen eyes that have been done with two different sizes, and it doesn't work. Now, once you get those cleaned up, then you want to move to the pupil. Okay, looking at her eyes and the pupil, this is the one area where I do deviate from the photograph because it makes the eyes look better if you make some subtle changes. Her pupil has a little catch light that's right in the middle of her pupil. This one's really small because it was an outdoor setting and there weren't any flashes being used. But sometimes you'll see multiple catch lights, sometimes you'll see 2 or 3, and sometimes they're so big that they like overpower the entire pupil. What you want to do is get your pupil in and then move so you have one catch light that ends up being half in the pupil and half in the catch light. That way the pupil can still look at you, but you have enough light that it looks shiny and realistic. So I've gone ahead and kind of freehanded where the pupil is. Now the pupil is always perfectly centered in the eye. Don't move that pupil. Even if the eye is looking a different direction a little bit, the pupil moves with it. It's not the pupil that moves, it's the entire eye. So very important that that stays perfectly centered. And like before, I'm just going to find the hole in the template that fits what I've already drawn, and I'm just going to use it to clean it up a little bit. And again, same one, both eyes. Now the eyelids kind of block some of that circle, so it's important to visualize the entire circle when you're placing that pupil. So it's not centered in just the area that you actually see, it's got to be centered in what would be the entire circle. Alrighty, once we get that in, we're going to go with the darkest darks like we always do, and that would be the pupil. It's nature's perfect little black spot. So I'm going to fill that in, and leave that little area for the catch light right there. And I think right now what I'll do is I'll just focus on one eye so it's not distracting for you. So we'll do this one to completion and we'll kind of leave that one for a little later on. So once I get the pupil in there and I get it as dark as I can, then I'm going to come out to the iris. Now, I love drawing eyes because every eye is different. Every eye has little nuances of color that are specific to that person that you're drawing. So she has kind of a dark edge around her iris. So I'm going to make it darker on the outside. And it's going to get lighter as it comes in towards the pupil. And you notice I'm leaving that area for the catch light. Then I'm going to take the tortillon and I'm going to blend it out because the eye is shiny and it's very smooth looking. You wouldn't see texture in a shiny eye. It looks so pretty. And then I'm going to just deepen again around the edge. And then to make it even look more reflective, I'm going to actually go ahead and blend through where the catch light is, and then I'm going to take my eraser and I'm going to lift it back out. That way it doesn't look empty and it looks more natural. It doesn't look like I drew around a little hole. Okay? Then I'm going to just take my eraser and I'm going to just clean up the edge a little bit as I go. Okay? Now, I might come back to that, but I want to get like the lashes and things. So I'm going to come above the eye and see how they come down over that iris a little bit. And I'm going to create what's called the lash line. Now, because of the way she's looking up, you don't really see her lid very much, just a little hint of it on the side here. So most of that kind of fills in. But she's got some real dark lashes, even though she's only 3. So that really does fill in quite a bit. Now, that's the only time that I'm really going to use a hard line. The rest of it has to remain very subtle because you don't see dark outlines around anything. So this is where you really pay attention to what the tones actually are. Here's that little lower lid thickness. Now this is where the lashes actually come from. The lashes don't start here, they come from down here. But lashes are done last, so I want to get the shading first. Now you can see that there's quite a bit of shadow under her eye here. People are very hesitant to put that in because they think it means like they've got bags under their eyes or something. And it's not bags under your eyes. It's actually the roundness of the eyeball back there. It's just strictly anatomy. And if you're hesitant to put that in because you're thinking of them in a negative way, like they're bags, then you lose the form. So you have to draw what you see. And quite frankly, even if they were bags under the eyes, you got to put them in because you're drawing a certain person and it is what it is. If they've got bags under their eyes, if you don't draw them, it's not going to look like them. So don't try to, correct things as you go based on what your brain is telling you to do, because you'll fall short of your likeness. And then, really, what's the point? Now, the white of the eye, that's another misconception. It's really not that white. So you do want a little shading in there. And surprise, there's that sphere again. The eyeball is really a sphere. So it's shaded on the sides to make it look round. See how much more realistic that looks than just if you had left it white? So those are little tricks of the trade that are very, very important. And now I'm going to connect it to the nose. And I can go back to a little bit of a dirtier tortillon here because I've got some nice shading there that needs to be done. And I can let the tortillon kind of do it for me. And there's the little darkness of the bulge of her eye and where the lower lid thickness is. And then right here, that's another little piece of anatomy, that brow bone that everyone has. So the eye and the eyebrow connect like a puzzle. And then where the eyebrow goes, I've got the basic shape already sketched in, so I'm just going to kind of give some light shading right there to build the eyebrow on, because you don't want to put an eyebrow, a bunch of little hairlines on top of white paper, because that just doesn't look natural. Okay, now we're going to put some tiny little lashes down here. You don't want to use lines that look too much like that, because that looks just too contrived, too fake, too dark, too everything. You want a light little touch with kind of a flick of the wrist so your pencil line will taper on the ends. Anytime you're doing hair, lashes, brows, whatever, you want to use a very delicate, quick flick of the wrist so you get that tapered line. And that's what I'm going to do up here on her brows. Now that I've got the shading under there, I can just put some gentle little pencil lines going just the way the hair is growing. And it's going to look very realistic. And there you have an eye. Now that we worked on the eye, we've worked on the nose, now we're going to go down to the mouth. This is what's called the triangle of features. And this is where I always go first. I don't go to the outside of the face, I don't do any hair or anything like that until I get this little triangle worked out, because this is where someone's personality, it's where their likeness is. And if you don't have the likeness at this stage of the game, you need to kind of stop and regroup and get your game together and figure out where the error might be. And it's usually just in these subtle little shapes. Getting someone's likeness is it's subtle. It's just tiny little things that come together to make us look the way we do. So I'm going to come down and I'm going to work on her mouth now, which is really, there's hardly anything to it. We're lucky where some mouths are huge and lots of teeth and things like that, and we don't have to deal with it this time around. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look and just get the little shapes, a little curl to her lip, like right here, very, very important. And look at angles. It's hard not to draw things too straight, and when you're looking at things, you can see that it would be real easy to do this little curve and then bring it straight across, but it comes up a little bit on the side. Those are the tiny little things that you need to be looking for. So as I come down here, I'm going to bring it up just a little bit and then down in the corner. And those are the things that are best captured in the grid, because the grid deals with straight lines and it makes you see the curves that much more. So the grid's really a good deal for teaching yourself accuracy. And now I'm going to come and get this little side as well. And then I'm going to start the shading. Now, generally, the upper lip is always going to be a tad bit darker than the bottom. And that's because your upper lip kind of angles in, like a little shelf that goes in, because it sticks out further because of our upper teeth, and it shelves in. And then the bottom lip kind of goes out, so it reflects light. So the upper lip generally will always seem a little bit darker. Now, naturally, lighting is going to change all that. There's always an exception to the rule, but in general. So now that I've got the upper lip, and that's about all there is to that, I'm going to move down to the bottom. Now, there's a little rule when it comes to connecting surfaces. And remember that hard edge or that outline that I told you about? The only time you're going to see like a real line is when two surfaces are actually touching or overlapping. And then it's okay to have a line, but it must look like a hard edge, not an outline. So with her lips coming together, we are going to have that little line there, and you don't have to feel obligated to blend that out just because it's a line. Now down here, we're just going to start the subtle shading of her lower lip, and I'm looking where are the shadows, where are the lights, and where are the darks. So it's darkest where the lips touch. There's a little bit of a cast shadow right there. Not much, but it's still there. And then she's got a little bit of a lip line that kind of describes the edge of her lip. And then she's got this shadow right here. And that's because of the bulge of her little teeth under there. And it comes down and kind of caves in somewhat where it meets the chin. So you have that little reflected light between the lip and the shadow. Now I'm going to softly blend this in. And you'll see that there's a lot of shadowing that comes off of her lip because it's a rounded surface. And that'll keep it from looking flat. It'll make it look like it actually is like part of her face and kind of settling into her face. There's that sphere exercise again, where everything's got to have contour and look rounded. And I'm going to come under here and do her chin. And even though it's lighter, I'm going to shade that reflected light area between the lip and the chin, because remember, it's never bright white. It'll look fake. It'll look undone if you leave just something bright white. Okay? Now I said never to forget this area between the nose and the mouth. So I'm going to come up and I'm going to better connect the two with a little bit of subtle shading so it all runs together. And this is also a good time to look where the two come together and make sure that you have the tones of the nose proper. This looks like it needs to be a little bit darker to me now that I've got the lips in there. So everything changes. If you change one thing or add one thing, everything else looks a little different. So you're always going back and forth and kind of reanalyzing as you go. You'll want to do it to completion, but don't ever hesitate to go back and alter so things connect better. I'm constantly, when I'm working a portrait, going around it, making sure everything looks good, and sometimes it looks good for a while and then you add other things, it doesn't look so hot. So you have to go back and just reanalyze it and rework it a little bit. It's just part of that process. Okay, now that we've got the mouth finished and we pretty much have been working on the triangle of features, we can go ahead and start applying some tone to the face in general. It's time to start putting some shading into the face, and this is where that sphere exercise is going to really come in handy. You have to work the face with the background. If you're going to have a background, you have to analyze the edges. And I think on this one, we'll like leave the background out and just have a white background. So rather than having a light edge like you see here on her face, I'm going to go ahead and take the shading clear to the edge. It won't be dark, but it'll be clear to the edge instead of leaving reflected light right there. When you come down onto her chin area, you have to analyze your edges. We've got an overlap here, so you have to decide where the darkness goes. Does it go under the neck? Most of the time it does because you've got a cast shadow, but because of the way she's looking at us and the way the lighting is, this is actually a bit reversed, where it's dark against light, and then over here, it's light against dark. She's got a little bit of a cast shadow here. So let me show you how to do that, and it's very much just like doing the sphere. I'm going to start putting the pencil lines in, going with the roundness and the contour of her face, just like we did with the sphere exercise. You never want to have a real dark outline around the face. It's got to create an edge. So if you've got a dark outline from your preliminary drawing, just kind of lighten it up with your kneadable eraser before you get started. And I'm going to come down here where the chin overlaps her neck area. And then I'm going to start the blending. And just like with the sphere, we're going to softly fade in to the light area of her face. Now, her full light area is up here because she's looking up at us and the light is coming down this way on her. So everything down here is a little bit darker. And it kind of comes off the mouth, so that tells me where the shading belongs and where I'm going to have to go with this. So I'm going to just kind of start that contouring right around the mouth area. And remember, everything connects. So here's another little sphere exercise in her chin, and it connects to what I'm doing now. So everything connects. Nothing is separate. As you work, keep your eye going back and forth from your work, because that's the only way to really be accurate. You're going to see my eyes going back and forth as I'm working on things, because what I'm touching here is what I'm looking at there. So it trains your hand and your eye to work together. And I see my students at times, they'll be looking at their photo reference, and then they just come over here and start drawing, and they're no longer engaged with what it is they're drawing. So what happens when you do that? You look, you come over, and you draw from memory, and that can destroy your likeness, because you have to be exact with everything you're doing. Everything runs together like a puzzle, so what you're doing here has to connect with what you're looking at there. It takes practice. I know it sounds complicated and I know it's a lot to remember, but it's like anything else. It's like when you first learned how to drive a car, you overdid everything. You oversteered, you overbraked, everything was too much. And that's what happens when you draw. You'll draw too dark, you'll blend too much, you'll obsess with every little thing you're doing, and then when you've done it for 100 years like I have, you don't even think about it anymore. You've trained your eye, so your hand and your eye and your brain are all working together, and it actually gets kind of relaxing. So again, just be fair to yourself and give yourself practice. Practice is the key to everything, and then it will become second nature. So don't rush it. You see how everything's kind of connecting together now? Another thing that helps is you'll see sometimes when I'm drawing that I'm squinting or blurring my vision a little bit. That's why I wear bangs, is because I've got so many wrinkles in my forehead from squinting all the time that it's just a fashion must. But it's been helpful and worth it, because when you squint your eyes, you have a tendency to see your tones a little bit clearer and the shapes become more obvious. So if you can squint your eyes and see those shapes better, you'll get a much better likeness that way. Blurring your vision kind of takes away the details, the small details, and lets you focus on the larger things that are more important at the time. Now, can you see how that is all coming together like a sphere exercise? Now that we've worked up the side of the face, she needs an ear. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to jump over here and show you how to do an ear. Now this is one of the areas that drives people crazy, because ears are complicated. They stick out and they've got shapes inside of shapes that are inside of other shapes. They're really a true puzzle piece experience. But there's certain things that you will always see in all ears. So practice drawing a lot of them and just do one shape at a time. And if you look at everything like a puzzle, you're going to be okay. The first thing I'm going to do is just make sure that I've kind of got my basic shape right. Can make a little correction right there. And then start with the darkest darks. Now right here, which is the little edge of her ear, right there, there's a little darkness because you've got two shapes that are overlapping. And then the inside of the ear has a shape that kind of sticks out and creates a little bit of like a little crevice. And her ear isn't all that complicated, and it's got some hair that's covering it too. So this one's actually a lot easier, but some of them get very problematic. There's just way too many shapes going on. And now I'm going to do some blending on it so it's not bright white. As I'm blending this, I'm going to tell you a little story on how you can become better at this. I didn't have a teacher. I'm self-taught, and I wanted to draw portraits so badly, and the way I did it is I got like those old hairstyling magazines, I still think they make them, and they had black and white pictures in them, and I made myself draw every ear, every eye, every nose in that magazine. I went one page at a time, making myself draw it, and some of them turned out, most of them didn't. It was all freehand, but what I learned from that was all the similarities. Even though everybody's eyes look different, everybody's nose looks different, there's certain things that you will always see. And I learned those things, those anatomical, important things that go missed most of the time. And just by pure repetition and practice, I got better and better and better. And if you can do that, don't obsess on the things that don't turn out well, but really study the ones that do. You'll be fine. You'll do great, but it just takes time. I didn't have me to teach me, so it took me a lot longer. You know, people make fun, well, you've been doing it 30 years. Well, yeah, but you know, it's not going to take you 30 years to get here because you have me. So just me and some practice and you'll do great, I promise. Now we have her ear. Ears are reflective because they kind of have like a different skin thing going on than the rest of your face. It's a little more oily, so they reflect light. So I'm going to take the kneadable eraser and I'm going to pull a little bit of highlight on the top of her ear. I'm going to clean up that edge too. And I'm going to soften that so it doesn't look outlined. And then I'm just going to pull a little highlight here. And then I'll work the rest of it later after we get a little bit further up when we start with the hair. Now that we have an ear in, now it's time to address the rest of the face, which is primarily the forehead. Now that's one area that people don't pay attention to at all. And they find it amazing that if you measure, your eyes are right in the middle of your head. And most people will want to draw those eyes up too high. And the reason is we pay no attention to foreheads. Usually they're covered with hair or hats, and there's no expression to a forehead unless it's an extreme expression. So we minimize it in our memories. Her forehead is covered with hair. But even if it is, you have to draw what's underneath the hair first. You never want to put anything like hair, eyebrows, or whatever just on white paper when the rest of it has been rendered. You have to have some shading underneath. So let's move ahead and tie all this together. Now remember I was telling you about this little brow bone? Well, it continues up into the temple and the forehead. And this little area of shading right there, most everybody has it. It separates the front of your head from the side of your head, and that keeps your head from just looking flat. So I'm going to take the dirty tortillon and I'm going to continue the blending off of the eye and from the side of the face and get some tone there that I can put the hair over. Now also, there's a lot of shading between her eyes, which is part of the forehead. So we want to go ahead and do that as well. And later on, I'll come back and I'll finish this eye over here and show you how that all links together. But for now, let's just stick with what we're doing here. Get her forehead in there. And now that I've done more blending, her eyebrow's starting to look lighter and lighter, so we'll need to kind of go back and make that stand out more. One thing to remember as you're using your tortillon, that this is graphite that it's just picked up from the paper that you put down, and you can't rely on them as a drawing tool, because as you're using them, you're actually wearing the graphite off and it's going back to clean paper. So if you get to the point where it just doesn't seem like it's doing anything, you don't have enough graphite on the paper yet. So I'm going to switch back to my pencil here, and I'm going to go back in with some pencil lines so my tortillon has something to blend out. And I'm actually going to draw this shadow in lightly and then reblend it. If your work starts looking choppy, it might be that you're just trying to depend too much on your tortillon for the graphite. And it really is just a tool to blend out the graphite that's already there. So by adding more of this, it has something to work with. And now I can blend that area. I'm going to come up under where the hair goes. So I have something to work with when I do it. Because your hair does, I mean, it casts a shadow on your skin, so it makes sense that there would be something under there. And your skin's not bright white anyway, so it makes sense that it would be under there too, just by the pigment. So don't leave it bright white. And I'm just going to kind of work this side for you right now. We'll just do one area at a time. Okay? Now, hair is always drawn in going the direction that the hair is going. If it's straight, use straight lines. If it curves, use curved lines. If it's curly hair, you're going to have to use pencil lines that replicate the curl and the direction of the hair. Hair also is shiny, so particularly with little blondes like this, you're going to have what's called a band of light. Can you see how the light in the picture forms like a little circle right here where it's reflecting off the roundness of her head? So we're going to start with the dark areas here first, and I'm going to come up in the bangs towards the light area this way. And I'm going to use pencil lines that replicate the direction that the hair is going. A lot of people hate drawing hair because it's time consuming, there's no doubt about it. I love it. I think when it's done well, it just looks so cool on the paper because you can make it look so realistic. I think people that don't like it are just impatient. So again, try to learn patience because it's so worth it in the long run. Okay, now here it's a little bit darker. So I'm going to come down this way into the light area, and I'm going to come up this way, and I'm going to leave that area. I'm not going to let those pencil lines connect. I'm going to just work dark to light here and dark to light here. And that's going to help start creating the form of her head. Now I got to come out this way, so bear with me while I get this all filled in. You can see the process. I'm going to do the sides here. This is a good time to use the brush. It would be real easy in your impatience to want to scribble that in. Don't, because the pencil lines, if they show, have to be consistent with what you're drawing. So these pencil lines are real important to depict hair. And if you did scribbles, it just wouldn't fit with that. So now I'm going to blend it out. And this time I'm going to blend everything, even that light area. I'm going to blend right through it because these aren't two separate areas. It's one area affected by a band of light. So I'm just going to blend everything right now. And usually after you blend, you have to reapply. It's just one of the stages. And go in and put in, excuse me, put in a little bit more darkness here. And it comes down along the side of her face in front of the ear. So I'm going to come down and connect that. Everything's a puzzle. It's a little darker here. And here it just almost fades to the color of her skin because baby hair is so fine. And blend again. And I want to be honest with you, sometimes when I'm doing portraits, I can spend like a day just doing the hair because I like it so much and I want it to look so realistic. But now that I've got it to this stage, I want to show you one of the little tricks with the kneadable eraser, because this is really the fun part. This is where you get to draw in the light and lift the light out, and that little band right there, I can take the kneaded eraser and literally draw the light back in. And see how it's starting to look like hair? Because those little lifts are starting to look like little hair strands as well. That's how I can get her little wispies on the side. And the cool thing about it is if you like make a mistake like that, just blend it back out. Who cares? We'll just get rid of that and we'll add some more. So it's a back and forth process, keeping what works, blending out what doesn't, lifting more if you need to. It's a real process of back and forth and back and forth. And hair can take 10 times longer than the whole face. I've heard people say, oh my gosh, I'm almost done with my portrait. All I have to do is the hair. And I laugh because they have no idea that it took them maybe 3 days to do the portrait, and it's going to take them a week to do the hair. So I laugh when they say that because it's not just the final last touch before your portrait's done. It's a job. And you can see how it's starting to take shape. And you can also see how long it's going to take to get the whole thing done. So I'll spare you that and give you the necessary things, and then I'll finish this on my own and show you what it's going to look like later. And there you have some baby hair. Now, we've got this area done, pretty much. We've got some work to do on the hair, but we've got everything done here. Now we've got to come down and give her some skin tone under the chin. So I'm just going to very lightly put in some pencil lines here and blend this out. Comparing the tones. Remember, you always have to compare what's dark and what's light when you're doing this. Where her shirt is overlapping, it's a little bit darker there, causes a little bit of a shadow. But her face is still darker than the actual neck area, so I want to make sure I don't lose that. And then I'm going to blend down. I She's got a little bit of shading right here that shows where kind of the shoulder and the neck are connecting, so I'm going to lightly put that in and blend it out. And I'm going to strengthen this tone right here again so we don't lose the two together. But you can see that you have to completely rework areas as you put in another area in to make sure that they're accurate and their tones are working together, because it's real easy to do things in pieces, and as pieces they look great, but when they work together something's lacking, so you have to work things against one another. Now, as far as her clothing goes, it's white. There's not a whole lot going on here. So I'm pretty much just going to concentrate on where there's a little subtle shadowing and tone. And oftentimes, unless they're wearing like a uniform or a costume or a particular outfit that you want to remember, I simplify the clothing so all the emphasis goes on the face, because I think clothing can be very distracting. Especially if it's dark. It can just like overwhelm the portrait and weigh it down terribly and take all the focus right off of what you really want them to look at, and that's the face. So on this one, I'm just going to put a little bit of light shading, a suggestion of something going on here, but I'm going to let her be the focus. And I'm just going to darken this a little bit so she stands out from the clothing. Remember, skin isn't white. It's really amazing how much tone there is to things when you look at it. I've got a phrase that I use in my studio a lot. Well, besides get it darker, usually people don't get things dark enough. They're hesitant. So you really need the contrast to make things look real. So I must say, get it darker, 50 times a day. But another thing I always say is, white isn't white and black isn't black. Even though you're drawing something that's white, like her outfit, there's going to be subtle nuances of tone and shadow and lights and darks in that. And when you're drawing black, black and white are both very reflective. And even drawing black, you're going to see highlights and darker areas of black. So nothing should ever be one tone. Everything has patterns and color changes and tonal changes in it. It doesn't matter how bland it may look at first glance. So basically, this is how you do a portrait. We've only done half of it, but you get the idea. It would be necessary now at this stage of the game to just keep going, just go up and add more tone. Her eyebrows need to be a little bit darker. There's a little bit more shadow. And these are all the fine-tuning things that you need to do as you work a portrait. Once you get to this stage, you're kind of working the whole thing against each other. So you just go around it and strengthen as you need to and blend as you need to and make subtle changes, and it all comes together. Well, here's the finished result, the finished portrait, and you can see that basically what I did is I just replicated what we did on the left side, carried it over to the right side, and then I did some fine-tuning to pull everything together. Some of the things I took a little more care with, I added a few lights and darks, but there you have it, a finished portrait. It goes to show you that if you really study the technique, if you take the practice time to learn your tools, learn the 5 elements of shading, and yes, practice that dreaded sphere exercise, you can really do beautiful portrait work. You don't have to be an experienced artist to get good results. You just have to give yourself the practice time and have fun and relax and take it from there. Your photo album's going to become your best friend. You're going to be able to do portraits of everyone you know and everyone you love. I do a lot of other types of art too. I do all mediums and all subject matter, so watch for other videos in the future.